Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Now, on this channel, we had been doing a segment called Occult Mondays, which really just turned into following one particular subject, and that was kind of just Evil Mondays, is what it really turned into because we did a couple uploads on Dr. Michael Shermer and his book, The Science of Good and Evil, and of course, some of his lectures and interviews that he has done about the book and about the science of good and evil. To be honest, I thought that I would make that as the subject of this, deep dive podcast segment that I had wanted to start back in October. But a lot of the Occult Mondays things had really just been about just evil in general, like what is good and what is evil. And that's something really different for the channel, but I really wish we could explore the subject just a little bit more. I mean, I know it's not going to be the most popular thing on the internet, but The Science of Good and Evil by Michael Shermer has a very specific thesis. What he says is that it is the collective happiness of humanity that moves a civilization forward. And that's a very bold statement. Michael Shermer is a psychologist from Stanford, and it's like, I mean, that's just a bold statement. Because to try and understand good and evil from that of a psychologist's perspective is a very, very interesting undertaking. I mean, it's interesting, no matter what angle you play with it. But the thing is that I would say about Dr. Michael Shermer is that what I don't get from him is certainty. I mean, okay, you might be thinking about something. If you hear this statement that the human concept of goodness is just the collective happiness of humanity, for starters, he's equating happiness and goodness and treating them like like they're one and the same. But what about this? Let's explore this subject. If you have 100 people in a town, right? Thought experiment. You got 100 people in the town, and 99 of them say that they don't like Jimmy. And then they decide, Jimmy hasn't done anything wrong. Like, I mean, Jimmy hasn't committed any crimes. Jimmy hasn't hurt anyone physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. But we don't like Jimmy because we just don't. I mean, we don't need a reason. If all 99 of us don't like him, let's kill him. And that will improve the collective happiness of humanity. Is that good or bad? Is that a good action or an evil action? Or is there any good and evil to begin with? Do they have the right to do something like that? Do they have the right to kill poor little Jimmy because of the collective happiness of humanity? Because then the collective happiness of that society would increase. But is that good or bad? It's like, remember, when people put out bold statements about this is good and this is evil, you don't judge it by the middle ground. You have to judge these things by the extremes. Whether it's the law or whether you're talking about something like the nature of good and evil, you have to judge things by the extremes. And Michael Shermer is very well aware of this. The book, The Science of Good and Evil, really addresses this. Because what he also says is that you have to deal with freedom. Michael Shermer is also a libertarian, by the way. And he says you have to deal with freedom. Yeah, it's the collective happiness of humanity. But you also cannot violate anyone else's freedom. That is also evil. And what I sort of interpret that to be is that this guy had a sort of, he had a statement that the collective happiness moves a society forward, it moves civilization forward, but then he realized things like, oh, wait, but you also can't violate someone else's freedom. And it's like, if you can just pencil in little extra lines to get at yourself out of trouble, I mean, does that really explain good and evil? Does that really explain good and evil as a science? I would like flat out refute it. Because what I would say instead is that if he's just going to be adding in these lines casually, then maybe it's not that well established that the collective happiness of humanity is what moves civilization forward. But what I would say instead is that I think that we can sort of recognize that, I mean, happiness is something that a lot of people want in life, but how do you equate happiness with goodness? I don't even think that you have to. I think they're actually somewhat different. I mean, whether you're when you're talking about morality and ethics, it's not only focused on happiness, especially when you explore some people like Buddha and Lord Mahavira from Jainism, Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. They were all about, like not only things like happiness, but also inner peace, which they differentiated from contentment and happiness and joy. All of those things are somewhat different. So I would really just also question some things that Michael Shermer says about the golden rule, and to just put things out kind of an open context. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. I brought this up in my first ever kind of segment on the science of good and evil, when we mentioned like, well, what if I see a beautiful woman? I mean, can I just walk over and kiss her on the lips, like because I want her to do that to me? I mean, I'm treating her the way I want to be treated, right? Right. I mean, she doesn't even have to ask me. She can kiss me on the lips anytime she wants, or, I mean, I probably shouldn't say that next line. But then, Michael Shermer says the golden rule is actually do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but ask first. I was like, that's what you think civilization is based upon? What it sounds like he's actually doing is reworking the libertarian non aggression principle into the psychology of what he believes good and evil are. But remember, belief is the operative word. That is a belief that he has. It is not an established scientific fact. The non aggression principle is, of course, you can do what you want to your own body, but you should never use any sort of act of aggression on another person or even on their property and their kind of the items that they possess. Property and possessions, and some libertarians really differentiate between the two. But the thing is, I would say though that rather, I don't even know what other people would think about this. I would put out that the human concept of evil is perhaps destruction without warrant, unwarranted destruction. And the removal of destruction is kind of what people view as goodness. If I just had to sum up good and evil into one single sentence, or maybe that was three sentences, that's what I would say. And I would think that once people sort of recognize that there's a very large conflation between happiness and goodness. Once again, we have Jimmy's town of 100 people. If it's just, about arguing what will make people happy, and they argue that they want to kill Jimmy because then the 99 people will be happier without him, I'd still say that that's bad. And I don't think that, I think very few people would disagree with that. You shouldn't have the right to kill him just because it will improve the collective happiness of humanity. And then it's like, well, if that's the case, then you're just kind of adding and subtracting things on a whim, and that's not very scientific. No, absolutely not. So what I would say that that's rather reflective of is just what Michael Shermer's talking about is something that is more argumentative, that is something that is more like malleable, as well as kind of conflating goodness and happiness, which I don't think that we should really do. And once again, I said, maybe the human concept of goodness is perhaps unwarranted. The removal of destruction, perhaps, if I had to put it up, the human concept of goodness is the removal of destruction, and evil is destruction without warrant. I mean, I don't know this stuff for certain. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not, a theologian. I'm not anything other than the host of Black Box Online Radio. But that's all I can really sort of say about this. So I just think that it would be something where we could challenge people who are trying to, sell books about the science of good and evil. I mean, maybe we'll explore it a little bit more on this channel, but I would just think that maybe we'll focus a little more on the true crime cases in the future, because I think that that's somewhat of, well, I'm liking the presentation on some of those. I mean, I love discussing the theories. That's really it. Here, something like this is much more difficult to discuss the theory as opposed to the theories that we have going on with the true crime cases. I had some excellent comments today that I hope we can use in the next Q&A session. And, but what do you think? Do you think that the collective happiness of humanity is what pushes civilization forward, and that is the human definition of goodness? And do you think that humans should govern themselves by the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but ask them first? Do you think that that is another sort of, pillar of human goodness? What do you have to say about any of these things? Drop a comment below and let's talk.